I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Emily whispered to herself as her hands trembled on the wheel of her car, rain hammering against the windshield like 1,000 tiny fists. She had been driving for what felt like hours, the cold evening air stinging her skin as she navigated the slick streets of the city. But her mind wasn't on the road. It was on the conversation she'd had earlier that day, the one with her mother that had left her more anxious than ever. Just a few days until her big presentation at the hospital, and she still didn't know how she was going to balance the demands of work with her personal life. She sighed, pressing the accelerator a little harder. Maybe if she got home quickly enough, she could forget everything for a little while. She wasn't so lucky. The next thing she knew, her car skidded across the slick road, and before she could react, her headlights caught a dark, massive SUV that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Panic hit her like a freight train. She swerved, but couldn't avoid the crash. The sickening sound of metal colliding filled her ears as she was thrown forward against her seatbelt. The airbag exploded in her face, leaving her gasping for breath, dazed, and completely disoriented. Her head spun, and she struggled to collect herself. As she opened the door and stumbled out into the rain-soaked night, she barely registered the shape of the man who stepped out of the black SUV. The tall figure seemed to glide through the rain, his presence so commanding it made the surrounding noise fade away. He was impeccably dressed, his dark suit soaked through but still pristine. His gaze was sharp and unyielding as he looked at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his stormy eyes. "Are you all right?" His voice was deep, rich with an accent that Emily couldn't quite place. She nodded, still too stunned to speak. "I should have been more careful," she muttered, not quite believing the words coming out of her mouth. He didn't respond at first. Instead, he took another step toward her, his gaze never leaving hers. There was something unsettling about the way he observed her, like he was analyzing every movement she made. "You're lucky," he said quietly, his voice almost a low growl. Emily's heart raced, but she couldn't understand why. She was in shock, sure, but the intensity of his gaze made her skin prickle. Before she could even gather her thoughts, he said, "I think you owe me." The words hit her like a slap in the face, and she couldn't help the shock that flashed across her face. What are you talking about?" She took a step back, trying to distance herself from this mysterious stranger, but he stepped forward, his presence so powerful she felt like she was being trapped. "You've damaged my car," he said, his tone still calm but tinged with an authority that made her stomach tighten. Emily's heart was pounding now. This wasn't just some random encounter. This man was different. He wasn't just angry, he was used to control. "I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice shaky. "I'll pay for the repairs." But he wasn't having it. "I don't think money will cut it, darling." The word darling felt foreign coming from him. He hadn't even smiled. His eyes were calculating, cold as ice, and it was clear that he wasn't interested in a simple exchange of money. No, there was something more to this. Something that made her pulse race and her mind spiral. "What do you want?" she asked, though she regretted the question the moment it left her lips. The man stepped closer, the air between them thick with tension. He was towering over her now, his presence so overwhelming that it felt as if the world around them had faded. "You," he said, voice firm. "You belong to me now." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her mouth went dry as she tried to process his words. This couldn't be happening. She didn't know who he was, but she could feel the dangerous power radiating off him. This wasn't some chance encounter. No, she had just crossed into a world she wasn't prepared for, and now there was no turning back. I was still trying to comprehend what had just happened when he took another step closer. His presence seemed to close in on me, like the walls of the city were narrowing until there was nowhere left to run. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. My hands were still trembling from the crash, but his cold, unwavering gaze was making it impossible to think straight. "I don't belong to anyone," I said, trying to muster some courage, though my voice shook. He didn't respond immediately, just looked at me with those eyes that seemed to see right through me. "You do now," he said in a low voice, as though it was a simple fact, not open for discussion. I opened my mouth to argue, but no words came out. I wasn't sure if it was because of the shock, or if it was because something in his tone made me feel like I was already powerless. My mind raced. Who was this man? And why was he talking to me like this? I barely knew him, and yet, his words were so definitive. They felt like a promise, a claim. a claim I didn't know how to reject. "I'm Dominic," he added, almost casually, as though he was introducing himself at a business meeting. But there was no warmth in his voice, no hint of friendliness. Just that cold authority that seemed to come naturally to him. I nodded, trying to process everything. "And you're Emily," he continued, his eyes never leaving mine. "I know who you are." His words were smooth, calculated, and I suddenly felt exposed. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice finally finding its strength, though I still felt small beneath his gaze. "I think I've already told you." He took another step forward, and despite my brain telling me to move, I froze. "You belong to me now, Emily, whether you like it or not." My chest tightened at his words, and I fought the panic rising inside me. This was absurd. There was no way he could mean it. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. I wasn't some character in a story where the mysterious man swoops in and claims someone as his own. But the way he was looking at me, the way he carried himself, made me question everything I knew about control, about power. "I don't belong to anyone," I repeated, though it felt more like a plea than a statement now. "Not anymore," he said, his voice softening just a little, but the threat was still there. His hand reached out, and I flinched, though he didn't touch me. Instead, he held up his phone and dialed something quickly. "I'll make sure you're taken care of," he said, not giving me the chance to respond. The words made my stomach drop. Who was this man? Why was he doing this? And what did he mean by taken care of? I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. I could feel my heart racing, but I wasn't sure what I was more afraid of, him or what I was starting to realize. I wasn't going to escape this. Not now. Not ever. The drive to his mansion was a blur. My mind was still reeling from what had just happened, and the eerie silence in the back seat of Dominic's car did nothing to help. The sound of the rain against the windows was the only thing I could focus on as we passed through the dark streets, the city lights casting fleeting shadows on the walls of the car. My heart was still pounding in my chest, and I had no idea what to expect. Every moment felt like it stretched into eternity. When we finally arrived, I could barely process the grandeur of the place. The gates of the mansion opened slowly, creaking in the damp night air, revealing a sprawling estate that looked like something out of a movie. High stone walls, perfectly manicured gardens, and a large marble fountain stood at the center of the courtyard, its water glistening in the dim light. I was frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do or where to go. "Get out," Dominic's voice cut through the silence, calm and commanding. I didn't argue. Slowly, I stepped out of the car, my feet sinking into the wet gravel as I followed him to the massive front door. It opened with a click, and we stepped inside. The contrast was startling. The cold, rainy night outside faded away as we entered the warmth of the mansion. Inside, the decor was all dark wood, rich leather, and gold accents, giving the place an air of opulence and power. It felt like I had stepped into another world, one that was both foreign and overwhelming. "This is where you'll stay," Dominic said, his tone flat, as he led me through the expansive halls. "You'll be looked after, of course." I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream. But there was a weight in his voice that kept me silent. I had no idea what he meant by looked after, but it didn't sound reassuring. "I don't want this," I finally managed to say, my voice shaking, though I didn't know if it was from fear or frustration. "It doesn't matter," he replied, his voice cold, like he was stating an undeniable fact. "You don't have a choice." His words hung in the air as we continued walking down the hall. The mansion felt like a maze, and the further we went, the more trapped I felt. I wanted to leave, to run. But the reality was, I had nowhere to go. The only way out was through him. When we reached the guest room, Dominic stepped aside, allowing me to enter. The room was vast and immaculately furnished. A king-sized bed covered in deep red and gold linens sat at the center, flanked by large windows that overlooked the grounds. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and soft, ambient lighting illuminated the space. It felt almost too perfect, too calm, and it made my skin crawl. "Stay here. I'll have someone bring you dinner. Don't leave this room unless I say so." Dominic's voice echoed in the empty space as he turned to leave. I didn't move as the door closed behind him. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, processing everything that had happened. How had I ended up here? A week ago, I would have never imagined something like this happening to me. I was just an ordinary woman, working hard to make a life for myself. But now, I was trapped in a mansion, at the mercy of a man who controlled everything. My mind raced, but no answers came. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of it all. But the truth was, I was scared. I had no idea what was coming next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't in control anymore. I woke up the next morning to the sound of soft knocking on the door. It was a polite, yet firm knock, a signal that nothing about this place would ever be anything less than controlled. I had barely slept. The bed was comfortable, almost too much so, but my mind wouldn't let me rest. Every moment since I arrived had been clouded with confusion and fear. I pulled myself out of bed slowly, dragging my feet as I crossed the large room. The door opened just enough for a woman in a white uniform to step inside, holding a tray of food. "Breakfast," she said softly, setting the tray down on the polished wood table near the window. I glanced at the food, my stomach growling in protest, but I had no desire to eat. My thoughts were elsewhere. She turned to leave, but hesitated. "Mr. DeMarco instructed me to ensure you are comfortable. If you need anything, just let us know." With that, she left without another word, leaving me alone again. I sat at the table, staring at the untouched food. The coffee smelled strong, rich, but it was the thought of Dominic that lingered in my mind, his words echoing in my head. "You belong to me now." I didn't understand how I got here. How had one moment, one crash, led me into this world? I was a stranger in a mansion surrounded by luxury and power that I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I had been in control of my life. I had my job, my independence, my plans. But now I was trapped. I didn't want to accept it, but the reality was undeniable. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a voice outside the door. "Ms. Hayes," a man said. His voice was deep, familiar, and it made me freeze. "Dominic." My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans to try and shake off the unease. I wasn't ready to face him again. Not yet, but it was clear that I wouldn't have a choice. The door opened, and there he stood, tall and imposing, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "Good morning," he said, his tone cool, almost detached, but there was an underlying authority to his presence that sent a shiver down my spine. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I hope you slept well," he continued, stepping further into the room. "I'm not here to make you comfortable. I'm here to make sure you understand your place." His words sent a wave of panic through me, but I didn't let it show. I kept my eyes on him, determined not to show weakness. "I didn't ask for this," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. He didn't flinch at my words. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "No," he agreed, his gaze never leaving mine. "But you're here now, and that means you'll learn to adjust." I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to run, to escape, but I knew that would only make things worse. There was nowhere to go. "What do you want from me?" I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper. He studied me for a moment, as though weighing his response. "I want you to learn that you don't have control anymore. You belong to me, whether you like it or not." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I refused to show how much they affected me. "You can't force me," I said, though it felt hollow. I was already starting to realize that I didn't have a choice. "I don't need to force you," he replied, his lips curving into a cold smile. "You'll see." He turned to leave, but then paused. "I'll be back later. We have things to discuss." With that, he was gone, leaving me standing in the room, my mind racing. What had I gotten myself into? What was he planning? I couldn't stay here. I had to find a way out, but with every passing moment, I felt more and more like I was falling deeper into his world, and there was no escape. The days blurred together after Dominic left me alone in the room. I barely slept, barely ate, but the anxiety gnawed at me relentlessly. I spent hours sitting by the window, staring out at the manicured grounds of the estate. It was beautiful, almost too perfect, and yet the perfection of it only served as a reminder of how trapped I was. The mansion, with its grand halls and polished floors, felt like a gilded cage. No matter how many times I tried to think of a way out, the reality of my situation seemed to push me further into helplessness. I hadn't seen Dominic again since our brief encounter earlier. His presence was like a shadow that lingered, even when he wasn't around. Every creak of the floorboards outside my door, every sound in the hall, made me tense. I could feel his watchful eyes on me, even when he wasn't here. My heart raced at the thought of him returning. What did he want from me? He had made it clear that I belonged to him, but I didn't understand what that meant. Was it just about control? Or was there something deeper, something more dangerous? The questions swirled in my mind, but no answers came. I tried to focus on the small things, like the food that was left outside my door each day. The staff, who were polite but distant, acted as though this was just another day in the life of their employer. I felt like a ghost in my own life, a person who had been erased and replaced by a new, unfamiliar version of herself. I had no control here, not over my circumstances, not over my future, and certainly not over Dominic. As the days passed, I began to understand the rules of this place, though I resented every one of them. Dominic didn't need to raise his voice to make sure I followed them. His presence alone was enough to make me comply, whether I wanted to or not. He had power, a kind of quiet, unyielding authority that I couldn't ignore. And every time I tried to resist, I felt more like a puppet on a string. It was late afternoon when he returned. The door opened without warning, and there he was, standing in the doorway. His dark suit was impeccable, as always, his expression unreadable. "You've been quiet," he observed, his voice steady, but there was an edge to it that made me nervous. "I didn't know what to expect," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to admit that I was scared, but the words slipped out before I could stop them. Dominic studied me for a moment, and then, without a word, he stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind him, and I was left standing there, facing him in the silence. "You'll get used to it," he said, his voice soft but firm. "This place, me. You'll learn your place, eventually." His words hit me like a punch to the stomach, but I refused to show it. I wanted to fight back, to scream at him, but I knew better. I knew that it wouldn't make any difference. He wouldn't let me go, not now. "I don't want this," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound strong. Dominic didn't flinch at my words. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "I know you don't," he replied, his eyes never leaving mine. "But you don't get to decide anymore." "I do." The finality in his voice made my heart race. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run away, but I knew that wasn't an option. Not here. Not with him. There was no escaping him, no escaping this life that had been thrust upon me. I was stuck. And worse, I was starting to realize that I might never be free again. I spent the next few days in a haze, my thoughts constantly circling around Dominic, around this strange, oppressive life I had been forced into. He didn't come by every day, but when he did, the tension between us seemed to grow thicker, heavier. Every word he spoke felt like a command, and though I didn't want to admit it, I started noticing the way the staff acted around him. They didn't question him. They didn't question anything. His word was law here, and I was no exception to that. The mansion, once intimidating in its vastness, began to feel like a prison. I was confined to the walls of this place, never allowed to leave without his permission. I had no idea where I stood anymore. I was just there, and no matter how many times I tried to convince myself to fight back, something in Dominic's eyes made me hesitate. He didn't need to raise his voice or get physical. He had a way of making you feel small, invisible, like you were part of a story that was already written, a story that I wasn't supposed to change. One afternoon, as I sat in the study, staring at the pile of books and papers that had been left on the desk for me to read, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching. My heart skipped a beat, and before I could react, the door swung open. It was Dominic. He didn't greet me. He didn't need to. The moment he walked in, I felt the weight of his presence, like he was pulling me into his orbit whether I liked it or not. He walked across the room with slow, deliberate steps, his dark suit fitting him perfectly, as always. "I see you've been keeping yourself busy," he said, his voice calm, but with an edge that made my spine straighten. "I don't need to be here to know what you're thinking." I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure how to respond. The tension between us had shifted, and now it felt like there was something unspoken in the air, something that neither of us was willing to acknowledge. He stood in front of the desk, looking down at me with those cold, unyielding eyes. "You're still trying to figure out how to escape, aren't you?" he asked, his voice almost teasing. The question caught me off guard. I opened my mouth to deny it, but the truth sat heavy on my tongue. I couldn't lie to him. "It's not that simple," I finally said, my voice shaky. "You're not going to get away," he replied, his tone no longer teasing, but firm, final. "I've already made sure of that." I wanted to say something, anything to push back, but I didn't. What was the point? Every attempt I made to resist him felt like it only brought me closer to his control. He was right. I couldn't escape. Not when everything was already in place. Dominic's gaze softened just slightly, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something, perhaps even care, before it was replaced by that familiar, emotionless mask. You're going to learn to accept it, he said quietly, his voice low but resolute. You'll see in time. This is for your own good. I couldn't respond to that. I didn't want to. I wasn't ready to accept this life, this fate. But as he turned and walked out of the room, I realized that there was nothing left to do but wait. Wait for whatever was coming next. I was trapped, and the walls were closing in around me. I spent another week in the mansion, though it felt like an eternity. Dominic's presence loomed over me, even when he wasn't around. I couldn't escape the feeling that everything I did was being watched. I would catch a glimpse of his men in the halls, standing by the doors, observing me without saying a word. The house felt more like a compound now, a place where I was no longer just a guest, but a captive. The days blended together, each one indistinguishable from the last. I spent most of my time in the study, pretending to read, pretending to keep myself busy, but my mind was elsewhere, trapped in thoughts of what my life had become. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But every time I considered it, I remembered Dominic's cold words. You're not going to get away. I couldn't argue with that. I was stuck here, and there was nothing I could do to change it. One evening, as I sat by the window, staring out at the city lights in the distance, I heard the familiar sound of footsteps. My heart skipped a beat, and I immediately straightened up, hoping for some kind of distraction. When Dominic entered the room, his usual imposing presence filled the space. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me with those cold, calculating eyes. You're still not used to it, are you? He asked, his voice low and calm. Used to what? I asked, though I already knew the answer. To being here, he replied, stepping closer. To being mine. The words hit me like a physical blow, and I quickly looked away, trying to steady my breath. I'm not yours, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Not yet, Dominic said, almost with a hint of amusement in his voice. But you will be. You just don't realize it yet. I wanted to fight back, to tell him that I didn't want any part of this life he was trying to force on me, but his presence was suffocating. He stepped even closer, until I could feel the warmth of his body radiating against mine. I don't think you understand, Emily, he said, his voice softer now, almost intimate. You don't have a choice. You never did. His words sent a chill down my spine, and for the first time, I felt the weight of his control pressing down on me. You can't keep me here forever, I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. I already have, he replied, his voice calm, as if the matter were already settled. I wanted to shout at him, to demand that he let me go, but something in his eyes made me hesitate. There was no escape. I had no power here. I was trapped, and every day that passed only made it clearer. Dominic didn't look at me with anger or hate. He looked at me as though I were something to be molded, something to be controlled, and it terrified me more than I cared to admit. As he turned to leave the room, he paused by the door. I'll give you time, he said, but don't mistake my patience for weakness. You belong to me now, and that's something you can't change. The door clicked shut behind him, and I was left alone again, trapped in the suffocating silence of the mansion. I was beginning to wonder if I would ever leave this place, or if Dominic would make sure that I never would. The days that followed felt like they were slowly eating away at me. Each day, Dominic's presence became more constant, more controlling. He didn't need to say much, but his gaze, his silence, held me in place. It was as though the walls of the mansion were closing in, and I was stuck in the middle, trying to find any semblance of freedom. I was no longer allowed to walk around the grounds like I had when I first arrived. The staff watched me closely, never offering a smile, never giving me a moment of peace. I was kept in the house, and even when I wandered into the gardens for some fresh air, one of Dominic's men was always nearby, shadowing me like a constant reminder of my captivity. I wanted to fight back, to scream, to do anything that would make me feel like I had control over my own life again. But every time I tried, Dominic's words echoed in my head. You don't have a choice. You never did. The weight of those words sank in deeper each day. I couldn't run. I couldn't hide. There was no escaping this life. One afternoon, after I finished another solitary meal in the dining room, Dominic came to find me. His eyes locked onto mine as he entered the room, his presence filling the space without a single word. He stood there for a moment, studying me. "You're still resisting," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "I told you this would happen, Emily." I didn't respond. I couldn't find the words. Instead, I just stared at him, refusing to let him see the fear that was gnawing at me. He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "You can't fight this. Not anymore. You're mine." His words were like a final blow. There was no room for argument, no space for rebellion. I was nothing more than an object in his eyes, something to be controlled, molded, a prisoner. "I'm not yours," I managed to say, though the conviction in my voice was fading. It was as if I were trying to convince myself as much as him. Dominic chuckled softly, a sound that made my blood run cold. "You think you're not? You belong to me now. And deep down, you know it." His confidence, his complete assurance in his words, struck me harder than anything else. He wasn't just playing a game, he believed it. He believed that I had already surrendered to him, even if I hadn't fully accepted it yet. "You'll come to understand it eventually," he continued, his voice softer now, but still filled with that same certainty. "You're here to stay, Emily, and that's something you can't change." I wanted to scream, to tell him that he was wrong, that I wasn't his. But deep inside, a part of me was starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he was right. He had been in control from the moment I arrived, and every step I took in this mansion seemed to draw me deeper into his world. A world where I was nothing but a pawn, caught between my desire for freedom and the cold reality of my situation. "I'm not going anywhere," he said as he turned to leave, his words hanging in the air like a final statement. "Get used to it." And with that, he walked out of the room, leaving me alone once again with nothing but the silence and the weight of his words. I didn't know how much longer I could take this. The walls were closing in, and I could feel my own resistance slowly wearing away with each passing day.